Hi, this cassette's going to be about being a family. I like playing baseball with my dad. I like playing outside, like tag and everything with my little brother. Me and my mom. I want to be a teacher when I grow up, and she's a teacher.
My favorite thing to do with my family is probably go to plays, play games, and have dinner.
Go on hiking and camping trips on mountains, high mountains preferably.
With my grandfather, we go out on walks, and it's just fun. It's so fun.
And then my grandparents in Florida, I like to go to the beach with them and stuff.
Sometimes they tell you stories and about what they did when they were little and how your dad or mom used to do things.
Well, I have a lot of cousins.
I have 4 cousins, and I usually babysit my boy cousin, and it's always fun to be together with cousins.
Love, mom and dad, cooperation together to help each other with different things, and responsibility, and the joy of having other people around you.
Betty was always doing the wrong things and being scolded. She had a beautiful big sister, Margaret, who was always sweet and good and never said an unkind word. Betty wanted to be just like Margaret, who was 5 years older than she was, and never said...
I wonder what Margaret looks like.
I don't know, maybe you can imagine it. Anyway, Betty and her family were Christian Zionists. And one thing Mother often told the girls was, make the separation. It means to separate the false view of man, who seems to be a sinner doing bad things, from the real, perfect, spiritual man of God's creating, who was always good and pure.
I bet she really tried to understand it.
I bet she did too. But the temptation to do exactly what she wanted to do, without regard for whether it was right or wrong, was often just too strong for her to resist. Well, one day, Betty's big sister Margaret brought home a new dress. The family didn't have very much money, and Margaret had worked very hard and saved her money for a long time in order to be able to buy this dress.
What color was it? What was it made of?
The dress was made of beautiful black silk, and Margaret was planning to wear it for a very special occasion the next evening.
What was the occasion?
I don't know. It doesn't say. Maybe she was going on a date.
It would probably be a dance.
But the next morning, when Betty was getting ready for school, she thought about that beautiful new dress hanging in Margaret's closet.
Uh-oh.
And how much she wanted something new to wear, too. So after Margaret left the house, Betty slipped into her closet, took the dress out, put it on, and off to school she went.
I don't believe her mother didn't see her.
Nope, her
She
mother...
probably wore a long coat.
She may have wore a coat to cover it up. Betty knew she would be home from school before her sister, and she planned to just slip the dress back into the closet before Margaret saw her. "Oh, I'm not going to hurt it," she said to herself, "and Margaret will never know."
Well, then again...
But what do you think happened? Betty had a chemistry class that day. Do you girls know what chemistry is?
It's kind of a science class.
Cameron?
It's a science class where they use chemicals and asphalt.
You mean acid.
Acid and stuff like that.
Anyway, Betty had a chemistry class that day, And while she was doing an experiment,
Uh-oh.
she accidentally sat down in some sulfuric acid. The acid ate a big hole right in the back of the dress.
Oh.
Betty knew she had done a terrible thing, and she was really afraid of what her sister would do and say to her. So as soon as she got home from school, before anyone could see her, she hung the dress back up in the closet. But this was Margaret's big night when she was planning to wear her new dress. Do you think Betty told her sister what she had done?
No.
No? Why
I
not?
don't think she will because she thinks she would be in big trouble.
Nope. Instead, she was busy thinking of all the excuses she could make, even the lies she could tell about how the dress got ruined. And Betty stayed as far away from Margaret's room as she could. But she listened as Margaret went into the closet to get the dress. Then she heard Margaret go into the kitchen and talk softly to Mother. And the next thing she heard was Mother calling out in that special tone of voice she used only when she was angry. "Ruth Elizabeth!" Uh-oh, thought Betty. Here it comes. She was ready. She had her excuses all set. What would you have done if you were Margaret?
I would have punished her.
So you think Margaret was very, very mad? Let's see. She certainly would have been justified in scolding Betty. But that isn't what Margaret did. Instead, when Betty came into the kitchen, Margaret just looked at her little sister with tears in her eyes and said, "Honey, why didn't you tell me you wanted a new dress so badly?" Just as Mother had taught her, Margaret made the separation. In other words, she loved her sister so much that she just couldn't attach the willfulness and selfishness to her.
What's willfulness?
Willfulness is doing anything you want to do just any time without thinking or concern for others. She was seeing Betty as God sees her, unselfish and innocent, and she wanted her to have all the beauty and joy that is rightfully hers as a child of God. Now, she didn't excuse Betty's wrongdoing in taking the dress, nor in not telling that she had ruined it. And Margaret was disappointed that she wouldn't be able to wear the new dress that night. But she was more concerned for Betty than for herself. And so instead of demanding that Betty be punished, she responded with love and understanding. Betty felt that love, and it melted away Mother's anger, too. And do you know what? That was the start of a beautiful healing for Betty.
I bet.
She saw just how wrong her actions had been, and she also saw the power of honesty, love, and forgiveness to heal. Betty began to realize that under God's law of divine justice, she could make the separation for herself. Do you understand now better what it means to make the separation? Instead of seeing someone as being bad, you see them
As God did.
as God did, that's right. Betty could stop seeing herself as a naughty person, and instead, she could pray to understand her true nature as God's idea. And she did just that. Betty found she did have the ability to act rightly, and she no longer followed every willful temptation that came to her. Margaret gained something too. She didn't get her dress back, but what she did get was a little sister who could live and act rightly. She had proved the healing power of God's law of love.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. once a year, we always go on vacation to both of our grandparents' house, and one lives in upstate New York. They have a creek, and there's 2 waterfalls. One's a huge one, about 30 feet tall. Well, when I went around the bend, it didn't look that steep, so I thought I could climb it, and Brita, my sister, was already at the top, and so I wanted to climb it too, instead of going around it as I usually do. Brita likes dangerous things, and I don't like climbing that much as she does, so I wanted to climb after. I was almost to the top, and there's rocks that are coming out, and there aren't really any things where you can hold your hands, and they're all slippery. So, and so I was almost to the top, and I got real scared, and then suddenly I felt myself slipping, and I didn't want to, and I called for my daddy, and he did hear me, but then a thought came to me that I was God's child and I couldn't go out of his hands, and I just felt so comforted, and then I thought that I could pray, and so I started to know that God is everywhere. Then I knew that God is the great I am. God can stand up over everything. I just felt like that for a minute, and then I felt so happy and so comforted, and then Brita said that she prayed too, and then I saw Daddy around the corner, but I was already on the top. I climbed all the rest of the way.
Elizabeth was having a hard time controlling her temper. Do you know what it means to have a bad temper?
You get really mad and you take it out on everyone.
Mm-hmm. If anyone crossed Elizabeth or even corrected her when she was wrong, she would become angry. She would say words she didn't mean to say.
Like, if someone makes a bad comment about you or something, you have to make a bad one about them.
Mm-hmm. And one day at school, she even threw the chalk and erasers across the classroom. Elizabeth didn't like acting this way, but she just couldn't seem to help it. The children at school laughed at Elizabeth, and sometimes they even tried to make her angry. By the time Elizabeth was in the 3rd grade, she was losing control of her temper more and more. Her teacher often sent her to the principal's office until she calmed down.
Sometimes the teacher gets upset with me, and sometimes I think she doesn't like me.
What do you think really is going on?
That she likes me a lot. It's just I'm disobeying some of the rules in the classroom and doing them wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you think she felt about going to the principal's office?
Bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then one day, Elizabeth thought of talking it over with her grandmother. Elizabeth's grandmother took her to the Christian Science Sunday School, so they often talked about God. Grandmother reminded Elizabeth of some of the things she was learning in Sunday school, about how she was a child of God, and that the other children at school were too, whether they knew it or not. Together they thought about how she could express her true nature as God's child. Can you think of some ways?
Well, by being nice and being loving.
Mm-hmm. What else?
To wait and not get upset about anything.
Mm-hmm. Expressing patience with the other children at school, or anyone for that matter that she felt
uneasy about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Elizabeth and her grandmother studied what Mrs. Eddy said about turning thoughts around. They read one sentence from Science and Health that says, "The real man, being linked by science to his maker, mortals need only turn from sin and lose sight of mortal selfhood to find Christ, the real man, and his relation to God, and to recognize the divine sonship.
And that's
what they were doing, turning away from Elizabeth's action as an angry, unreasonable child to her true identity as the reasonable and loving child of God.
That's better than being in a bad mood.
How do you think that would make her feel?
Happier.
Yes. Elizabeth promised herself and her grandmother that she would always try to turn away from being angry and remember that she was God's child. She wanted to think loving, godlike thoughts about those around her, too, no matter how they were acting or talking. To help her, Elizabeth's grandmother told her of an American television game show called To Tell the Truth.
Why did you tell her about to tell the truth if her problem is temper?
Well, listen. In the game, 3 people all say they are a certain individual. But of course, only one of them really is, and 2 of them are pretending. Then the players who are competing begin questioning the individuals to see if they can find out which one is telling the truth about who they are. After the players have made their guesses, the host of the show says, "Will the real Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so please stand up?" And everyone sees who the real person is. Elizabeth thought about that talk with grandmother and about that game show. When she was tempted to become angry, she began to say to herself, "Will the real Elizabeth please stand up?" Then she would remember to express her true spiritual identity as God's child, and she became more peaceful and loving.
Will the real Elizabeth please stand up?
Well, pretty soon these angry feelings disappeared altogether. Elizabeth was so much happier. So were her parents.
Probably her teacher, too.
Probably.
We thank thee and we bless thee, O Father of us all, that even before we ask thee, thou hearest thy children's call. We praise thee for thy goodness and tender constant care. We thank thee, Father, Mother, that thou hast heard our prayer. We thank thee, Father, Mother, for blessings, light, and grace, which bid mankind to waken and see thee face to face. We thank thee when in anguish we turn from sense to soul, that we may hear thee calling, rejoice, for thou art whole. We thank
How do we get groceries in this big city?
Well, we drive around to our most common store, and we get all the stuff we need.
Yeah.
And
how many bags is that usually?
Usually about
4.
4 or 5.
Yeah.
4 or 5.
Sometimes oranges, box of oranges.
Yeah.
I'm Gordon, and I live in New York City with my wife and 3 boys, one of whom is here right now, Parker. We live in a townhouse, which is like 4 shoeboxes, big shoeboxes stacked on top of each other. It's a tall, skinny house with a brick front, built 100 years ago, and it is about 10 feet from the street, and buses and cars whiz by all day long. So we buzz home in the car and take these 4 or 5 bags of groceries into our front of our skinny old house. Then we have to go up a set of stairs, right?
Yeah.
And
instead of an elevator, which would be much easier.
Yes, it would, in a big apartment building, but that's not us. We're in this old building. And how do we get the groceries up the stairs? I remember for years I used to tote them up myself, but now, what?
Well, you have 3 boys.
Yeah.
But one, unfortunately, isn't useful for that yet.
Why not?
Too little.
Yeah, he's about 2, and you're 7, and your brother's
almost 7.
Almost 7. Your brother's 9. So it must have been a Saturday, and I remember saying, Parker, dude, why don't you take 1 bag up the stairs, right?
Well, 1 at a time.
1 at a time, yeah. And what happened next?
Well, I started with 2 at a time, and it was only my first 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I only had about 2 more steps to go till I was at the top.
Yeah.
And I picked the bags up because I had put them down on the steps.
For a little rest?
For a little rest. And then I picked them up, but they fell back down on the steps. And then I went head first backwards down the stairs. So they were rolling down after me. And the next thing I knew it, I was at the bottom of the stairs crying like mad.
Mm-hmm. I remember that.
And then Dad came running in and picked me up just as one of the bags was about to fall on my foot.
Mm-hmm.
And after a few minutes, I calmed down, but my head hurt a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I just went to my room.
You asked to go to your room?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went to my room, and I was thinking about wonderful qualities about God and abilities that He gives all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about that God made me, but God didn't make hurt, so I couldn't be hurt. And after a while, the pain was gone.
Well, it's like, what's God like? What is Father, Mother, God like?
Loving, caring.
How do you know God's there, though? You can't see Him or her.
Well, we know that He's there because a lot of people have prayed and God didn't answer.
Mm-hmm.
Or heard the still small voice.
Have you ever read that directly out of the Bible, maybe, or have someone read it to you? The still small voice.
I learned it from Mom.
Yeah.
When she was telling me about a story, and I forget most of it, but the part where she mentioned the still small voice is the part that I remember.
Yeah.
But I know that the still small voice is the voice of God.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be really quiet and really listen.
Is that why you wanted to go to your...
Very hard.
Was that why you wanted to go to your room to be alone?
Yeah.
I see. Does it depend on having good ears, big ears, or good hearing?
No.
Mm-hmm. I remember it, I came in to see the end of your fall, and picked you up and comforted you, got you out of harm's way. I wasn't going to let more bags fall on you or anything.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to give you a lecture on obedience at that time, or feel that you somehow deserved to take a tumble for that. The idea was that God was right there. I'm thinking to myself, this boy is God's child, and that he is whole. He's not damaged somehow. The way Mary Baker Eddy said it, and you've read this before too, Parker, is in her chapter on recapitulation in Science and Health. She asked the question, what is man? And the answer is, man is not matter. He's not made up of brain, blood, bones, and other material elements. The scriptures inform us that man is made in the image and likeness of God. That's what we keep in mind with you and with ourselves.